Hello there, I am Zolairlaw, and this is The Joy of Computer Gaming, where we investigate unusual and good examples of computer gaming history. Today's highlighted game is Montezuma's Revenge, the search for secret stashes of sunstones, spring over snakes, and stab skulls and spiders with swords game. It's a fast-paced platform game by Robert Jaeger, released in 1985 by Parker Brothers, originally on the Atari 8-bit, and then later that year on the Atari 5200, Atari 2600, Apple II, ColecoVision, Commodore 64 PC, and ZX Spectrum as Panama Joe. Much later on SEGA Master System in 1989, and there's even a version for iOS and Android being released by Robert Jaeger himself in 2020. This is the first platform game I played where the controls were incredibly responsive and just moving around felt great. It is mildly similar to Aztec from 1982, but feels more solid and complete in comparison. Each room uses a simple 8x8 brick pattern which fills the outside. These have two colors, but they change depending on what floor of what level you're on, with 4 rooms as exceptions using their own colors. At the top left is your inventory, in the middle is the level, and at the top right is your score. The bottom bar under the inventory and score will show a number of hats to represent extra lives, though if you have more than 11 you won't see them. Interestingly enough, the middle top part of each room is actually traversable by the character, and one room in particular lets you jump in front of the level number. In essence, the full view screen is used to great effect. There's also a neat two-tone font used for the score and the level number. These change color based on the floor and level you're on, just like the walls do. Your character has 4 frames of walking animation, 2 frames for climbing with an awkward bending over frame when at the top of a ladder, a single frame for jumping and sliding, and a couple frames for shaking his legs when he falls too far and lands on his head. If you fall into a fire, a skull-shaped puff of smoke fades in and rises up. The snakes only have 2 frames of animation, the spiders have 6 but are sequenced out in a set of 8, and the rolling skulls have a whopping 16 frames, though half of them are mirror images. The effect of the skulls rolling in the direction they are traveling looked impressive for the time. The skulls pulse between a few light colors, giving them an eerie glow. There are also fires which shift between 3 frames somewhat randomly, disappearing bridges which have a strained fuzzy effect when visible, and lasers that just look like glowing chains. Complementing the fast-paced feeling of the game, it used a full 60 frames a second for moving your character and fast-moving enemies, using half of that for slower enemies. This smooth motion looked great at the time and still looks pretty nice today in these 60 FPS videos. You play as Panama Joe, a name chosen to be reminiscent of Indiana Jones, a treasure hunter who is delving into Montezuma's fortress to raid the treasures within it. Of course, the fortress is filled with many traps, such as fire pits, laser gates, disappearing floors, snakes, rolling or bouncing skulls, spiders, and the darkness, as well as 3 different types of doors to prevent your progress. To help you along the way are ladders, ropes, keys, amulets, swords, and torches. Oh, and of course there are loads of orange gems to pick up along the way. Throughout this video, I will be mentioning rooms by numbers. These are simply a grid of the floor and the exposition of each room. There isn't a consistent naming convention for the rooms, so I had to create one. It's 0-based since I'm a programmer. Sorry if that confuses anybody. Room 110 is this room, which is floor 1, room 10, horizontally. This is the room 6-4. This is the room 9-0. The map consists of 10 floors, starting with the top floor, floor 0, with only a single room, and then each floor containing 2 more rooms than the floor above it, so that the last floor, floor 9, is 19 rooms across. This creates a triangular shape to match the pyramid shape the Aztecs used. This also means that there are 100 total different rooms in the game. There are technically 9 different levels in the game. According to the manual, these are just different difficulty levels, not actually 9 different fortresses that you will be raiding. However, once you finish a level, you move on to the next level and continue from there. If you complete level 9, you are taken back to level 9 again for the next playthrough. What they did for levels 1 and 2 is quite clever and simplifies these earlier levels by only offering about half of the map. On level 1, almost all of the right half of the map is inaccessible by placing a wall on the right exit and removing the ladder from room 210, then making certain all of the central rooms do not allow heading to the right side. On level 2, almost all of the left half of the map is inaccessible by removing the ladder in room 36 and making certain the central rooms do not allow you to cross over to the left half. For levels 3 and above, both sides are accessible and you can explore every room should you so choose, though that would take about half an hour as I found out by doing just that. Aside from that, the rooms are technically the same from level to level, except that there are subtle differences like a wall appearing or disappearing, more or faster enemies, or an item not being there on one level versus the next. There is also the darkness, which increases every level up to level 9. On level 1, darkness only affects the bottom floor, floor 9. However, on level 9, every floor except the entrance is in darkness, and there are no torches to be able to see, so you better have the rooms you enter memorized or you'll die a lot from pits you can't see. The wall colors cycle up a floor each level until level 4. Floor 4 on level 1 is the color of floor 3 on level 2, floor 2 on level 3, and floor 1 on level 4 and above, though you can't tell on level 9. There are also 4 rooms that always have the same color. Rooms 9-8, 9-9, and 9-10 are always the last color, which all of floor 9 has on level 4 and above. And then there is the snake room, room 6-4, which always has this unique green color regardless of level. To play, just press the joystick left or right. Press the button to jump upward, or press the button in left or right to jump in that direction. You can climb up and down ladders and ropes, with up and down as expected. You can even hold diagonal directions to walk and auto-climb up or down a ladder or rope, which is incredibly useful when trying to find them in the dark. The controls are simply excellent in this game. It feels incredibly responsive with no noticeable input lag and just a tiny bit of button queuing to make multiple jumps easier to do. Whoever was responsible for the final release's controller handling did an amazing job. The basic gameplay just consists of getting through the rooms, collecting items to get points, or get further, and avoiding obstacles. Your character moves at a constant, fairly rapid speed. If you jump to either side, you go up 2 spaces and you maintain the same forward momentum the entire time as if you were running, which makes jumps like this one to the rope from the top in rooms 2-8 and 8-4 possible. There's no way to control a jump once you've made it, so they're always the same. This makes figuring out how to jump in rooms 5-6 and 5-11 a bit tricky at first. The obstacles are lasers which kill you, fire which kills you, falls or areas you need to jump over which kill you if you fall more than 3 spaces. Thankfully, jumping does not count as increasing your height. Blinking bridges, which often kill you if they disappear under your feet. Conveyors that try to move you to your death. You get the idea. The long, blinking bridges in particular are tricky to deal with because there's just barely enough time to cross them, so I generally jump on them as they blink on and jump near the end in case I don't make it by running. Both the blinking bridges and lasers blink on and off on a set timer, which makes for a tricky jump in rooms 9-8 and 9-10 if you get the white key there because both blink off at the same time. There are ropes you can jump on from any distance or climb up and down, ladders which you can only get on or off of at a mount point, and poles that you can jump on from any distance and you slide down until you hit the bottom. The manual calls the ropes chains, but they're meant to be ropes because some of them are on fire and burn up in the prototype. You can also jump upward through walls, which helps with the end of 3-9 in particular because it seems impossible to get to the top here, but you can just jump up at the end of this rope. The ladders are a bit annoying at times because if they do not touch the ground, you fall off and cannot get back on them when going down them, which happens in rooms 4-5, 6-9, and 8-8 among others. There are actually 4 rooms like 4-5, 2 of which are mirror images, and this room takes some effort to figure out how to get through without dying. In a few places there are unavoidable, or nearly, enemies that you must have a sword to deal with. In room 3-9 there's a skull at the bottom of a pole, which you can either kill with a sword or you'll die without one. I've never been able to avoid it. In room 5-4, you get a reward of 3 swords for killing that skull, and in room 6-3 you get 2 gems for killing the spider here. The game really does expect you to die a lot. If you run out of lives on level 1, you get 1 continue which wipes out your score but gives you 6 lives, which is great to help beginners get started. You get an extra life for every 10,000 points up to level 3, and every 20,000 points for level 4 and above. I did a playthrough where I got as many points as I could on levels 1 to 3 without dying, and you could see by my score at the end of level 3 I had 28 extra lives. For levels 4 and beyond I wasn't trying so hard to get points, but by the end of level 9 I had 49 extra lives. How do I know? I had to commit suicide over and over and count. Speaking of the end of a level, when you jump down from room 9-9, you appear in a treasure room. This consists of lots of floating ropes and gems, where hitting the edge of the screen just generates more random rooms. The higher the level you just passed, the more gems there are. After a while, the gems stop glowing, and a little later they all vanish. Then jumping down leads to a long pole that takes you to the next level, at least until level 9, where you go back to level 9 after beating level 9. It's temples all the way down. There are 5 kinds of items in the game: treasures, amulets, swords, torches, and keys. You have 5 inventory slots, and once they're filled, you can't pick any more items up, not even treasures which normally don't require an inventory slot. Treasures just give you 1,000 points each. Amulets are temporary items that disappear after about 500 frames or 8.5 seconds, and make it so enemies cannot hurt you. Fire, falling, and lasers will all still kill you while you have one, however. Swords can be used to kill spiders for 3,000 points and skulls for 2,000 points, but they do not work on snakes. You lose the sword once you use it. There are 3 kinds of keys, red, blue, and white. They are consumed to open a matching colored door. Torches provide light in the dark rooms. Having multiples does not help you, but you can carry any number of them, up to 4 on level 3 for example. There are no torches on the last level, level 9, so you have to play it in the darkness. There are only 3 kinds of enemies, snakes, skulls, and spiders. Snakes never move but cannot be killed with swords. Skulls either roll or bounce constantly at one of the 2 speeds, and spiders crawl along at one of 2 speeds, and once they reach a ladder, they may take the ladder or change direction. Thankfully, spiders do not climb all the way to the top of ladders going up a screen, so you can wait until they're in a more convenient spot in situations like this. Both skulls and spiders can travel over disappearing ground as if it was always there. The faster rolling skulls and spiders move just as fast as the player. Touching any of these causes you to lose a life, unless you have an amulet when overlapping them, or if you don't, you have a sword to expend slaying a spider or skull. If you die from one, that particular enemy despawns for the rest of the current level, making the game easier in some cases or passable at all in a couple of cases where you're expected to have a sword to survive. Well, they don't actually despawn on level 5 and above, so in some cases you absolutely must have a sword to survive, such as the bottom of this pole in room 3-9. A few notes from La Cucaracha play whenever you grab an item. A variation of a later part of the song occurs when you gain an extra life. And a strange piece plays in 3 variations when you reach the treasure room, which to me is vaguely reminiscent of Carnival of Animals Aquarium by Camille Saint-Saëns. The sounds are nothing remarkable. You will often hear your feet as you walk around. It sounds and looks like Panama Joe is doing this adventure barefooted. You'll also regularly hear your character jump, land, and slide down poles. Unless you play perfectly, you'll also hear crunchy sounds from dying, though falling makes nearly the same sound as landing. The only other sounds in the game are opening doors and killing a skull or spider with a sword. This was one of my mother's favorite games, which in itself was unusual since she didn't play many action games at all, except she is the only person I know to have completed Pitfall back in the day. I remember watching her play once, and she reached level 9, where even room 1-9 was all dark. When she reached this point, she considered the game truly completed. It's unfortunate that she stopped there because level 9 provides its own challenges, especially since there's no torches available. The version of the game we had when I was a kid was the preliminary Monty version of the game. You learned to avoid the bottom left part of the map to ignore the glitches down there. I'll talk about that in a bit. We also had the prototype back in the day. Somehow. This caused a bit of confusion because we were not told it was just a prototype. It felt like a more complete sequel, but the gameplay was a lot harder. Was the original just supposed to be called Preliminary Monty and the other one was the final version? Or maybe it was Montezuma and the harder one was Montezuma's Revenge? I'll explain more about the prototype in the version section. I wanted to make a giant pyramid animation of Montezuma's Revenge ever since I made the big screen of rooms from Aztec. For that animation, I needed to capture video in every single room of the first 3 levels of the game. So I thought, why not play a more or less perfect run-through of the levels where I try to get the most points possible without dying. Granted, I do terrible in the final treasure room, so anybody could do this and get a higher score without too much effort. I tried to open every possible door, which is impossible for level 2 and above since there are more doors than keys. I had to use swords on spiders whenever possible, and to avoid dying completely. I know there are a few thousand extra points I could have had if I died to get the sword in room 2-8, or died to clear some skulls so I could stab more spiders with the swords available, but that's not how I decided to do it. However, the end result is that I had a high score that I had never seen in the game before. Over 68,000 at the end of level 1, which takes about 10 minutes, over 144,000 at the end of level 2, which takes over 11 minutes, and over 281,000 at the end of level 3, which takes almost half an hour to do. This means I had a total of 33 extra lives as well. Then for levels 4 through 9, I did a quick route to pass each level except to cross over to the right side at the end of level 9 because I could. I stopped after completing level 9 with 583,900 points. Other than making this fancy pyramid animation, what was the point of this? No idea, but thankfully it didn't take too long. It's like the Ultima 3 treasure chests all over again. Or speedrunning in Cave Lord, a game nobody cares about. Or having a world in Terraria with every single item in the game, yes, even angel statues. In fact, why the heck did I do an hour-long video of Rings of Zilfin? No, seriously, why did I do that? If you can't tell, I've played quite a bit of this game and explored every corner of it. As someone that really enjoys exploring, making maps, and optimizing how I do things in games, there are many parts of making this video that aren't even actually playing the game, which I enjoyed doing. The game itself is quite fun, but unfortunately it only takes until you complete levels 1 and 2 before you've had a chance to see every room and everything the game has to offer, though the increasing difficulty and darkness do shake things up a bit. Still, anybody that likes fast-paced platform games should definitely play Montezuma's Revenge. It's even available now on Android and iOS. There are no game-breaking bugs, or even ones that most anybody will ever run into other than the jumping one. I'm being pretty nitpicky here, but I did find a few oddities while playing this game. One that everybody probably notices, though, is that when jumping against a wall, the game registers your Y position incorrectly and you jitter a bit, making the hop a bit faster than normal. You can use this to your advantage in some places, like all of these vertical hops when doing normal up jumps takes a lot longer than the jittery shifty jumps you do when you push against the wall in room 2-8. Though not technically a bug, more a level design flaw, but it is possible to have a dead man walking situation on level 2 at least. There are numerous rooms with loads of keys and doors in them, and you may be tempted to open as many as possible because you get more points doing that. However, there are more doors than keys, and if you run out of keys, you can no longer open red or blue doors. This becomes a severe problem right before the last room, because you need a blue and a red key to get into here. If you do this, your game is over and you will have to restart. A similar situation happens on level 6 and above. If you went to the left and got to room 3-9 without a sword, you cannot get past the first skull at the bottom of the pole at all, because enemies do not despawn on higher levels. There are 3 swords you can get before here, though one of the 2 in room 1-8 does require dying for, but it is still possible to get extra attempts. And it's also still totally possible to lose them all to skulls and spiders before getting back to room 3-9. You can't cross over to room 210 from room 2-9 on these levels either, which cuts off any way of completing the level at that point. You would have to restart the game if this happened. Another design flaw, at least it feels like one to me, is that you can carry multiple torches. On most levels, like level 3, you can have up to 4 of them, leaving you with only a single space in your inventory. I only picked these up to get more points, not because I wanted to clog up my inventory. One site mentions that the 16K version of the game has a bug where you can lose all of your lives falling from just the right spot in the end sequence. I tried this with the disc release, preliminary Monty release, and the Atari 5200 cartridge version, and absolutely all of them let you hit the bottom without hitting a pole, but you do not die. There's one noticeable display bug that may have gone unnoticed by most players. When you complete a level and reach the start of the next level, the color of the tiles is wrong. It's matching the start of the level you just completed instead. You can go down a floor and then back up to see the correct color. Since levels 5 and up are using the same colors as level 4, this bug isn't noticeable on them. Quite often, there's a little color glitch if you go into a room with skull spiders or snakes. This noticeably causes snakes and spiders to be white for a moment. Each enemy takes up a slot and their color doesn't change right when the room swaps, causing this effect. This can also cause skulls to be spider green or snake blue for a moment, but since they change color anyways, it's generally not as noticeable. In some cases, skulls or spiders would appear in the wrong place on the screen for a frame. It didn't happen often, but I saw it happen in room 8-2 a couple times, and in 8-3 and 8-14. Once I even saw a misplaced spider hovering over the flames in room 6-9. In room 6-4, the standard room color shows for a few frames before the correct color takes over, as it has a special override. The 3 centermost rooms on the bottom floor also have a special override color, but they do not exhibit this problem and switch colors immediately. And when you are sliding down poles, the poles show up through quite a lot of your characters, such as in your hat, through your neck, and even portions of your back. This slide frame was not properly prepared. Unless you look at lots of stills or frame-by-frame animation from the game, you'll probably never even notice this one. Robert Jager's original version of the game was just a prototype and was created in 1983. It was never completed. This is what he showed to Parker Brothers and gave them to work with. After this, he had no part in any of the releases of the game. Right off, we can see there's an introduction sequence along with a rendition of The Spanish Flea. After the title completes drawing, it mentions it's by Robert Jager, and the concept is by Mark Sunshine. If this full version would have been expanded upon and fixed up, the game would have been even better, especially with some of the cool concepts that didn't get used. Oh yeah, there's also a high score list in this version. There are many differences with this version. The layout of the map is different. Many of the rooms are harder, with changes like fire burning up ropes in some rooms. There are bats that take you away if you take too long in a room, there are no continues, and you start from the second room instead of above the pyramid. There are lots of little visual differences as well, such as everything pauses for a moment when entering a room. Alternate tiles are used in some rooms, little cobwebs, little barrels in places, the blinking platforms come in multiple colors, snakes come in various colors as well, your character is wearing different clothes with a bigger hat, there's a fade effect and then your character walks into place when you die, a similar effect happens when you gain a life, enemies fade out when you kill them, and there's a game over message when you lose your last life. There are two nifty ideas in this version that are missing in the full release. The first is that there's a boss, Montezuma. He kills you if you're standing on the ground when he stomps because this makes you fall through the ground. A way to defeat him was never coded in, though since everything but my torch disappeared here, maybe you were expected to catch something on fire to defeat him, like light a rope that would make something fall on his head. There isn't actually an end to this prototype, so this is probably how you were meant to end it. The other neat idea is a room that changes based on how you enter it, which was done for the torch room. I called this the Room of Lies because you come in here from above and it looks like you could just come in from another side, right? From the right, no, it's different. And from the left, in fact, you have to come in from below and hey, where did all these doors come from? There are a number of problems that easily could have been ironed out before full release. There is an annoying constant blippy sound I wish wasn't there or that it was quieter. Pulls sound a bit buggy. The controls feel less refined in this version, in particular with climbing being really picky, but it's also harder jumping right after landing because you have to time it just right. The bug from jumping against walls doesn't happen in this version, however. A lot of the rooms are incomplete and just empty or glitchy. How the heck are you supposed to get up this ladder? What the heck is up with this room? Why are there a couple of skulls just hanging out in the wall there? The spider is stuck, and still manages to kill me. And why is there a skull rolling along the top of the screen at times? In the room with Montezuma, you can also climb all the way up into your score if you don't have a blue key. Go to the right and you could re-grab whatever is the leftmost item in your inventory, so some people use this bug to have a sword in the first slot to be able to kill every spider and skull for more points. I just got more torches because I wasn't prepared. The prototype was meant to run on an Atari 800XL or better with 64K of memory available. The final release was reduced to fit a 16K cartridge instead. This is why so many features were removed for the final version. A preliminary version of the game was released separately. It was likely a release candidate for the final game that somehow got leaked. It has a cracked screen and calls it Preliminary Monty. We had this version when I was a kid and it wasn't as buggy as the prototype, so it's what I'm most familiar with. Aside from the starting screen about the crackers, you'd almost expect this was the exact same as the final version, though there isn't a sound when you kill skulls or spiders with a sword. But the biggest difference is a couple of rooms in the bottom left that are not the same. One of these has a spider in the central area that could climb down the ladder, then through the conveyor and down to the ground below. There's a rope here that leads up to the other room, which is completely broken. You can enter this room from the right, and it's obvious something was incomplete here because your score and inventory area get all glitchy. It's also a space down from the previous room, which is really clear just entering and leaving the room. Not only that, but this room is totally pointless as there's no way to get across. If you come at it from below, it only gets worse, because now you're inside of the fire, but that doesn't kill you. You can't go back down, so entering this room is certain death. You can wander around in the flames for a bit and even jump on the platforms within it. However, the moment you touch the top of the fire, you die, so you can't even try to jump out on the left edge. This is the Atari 5200 version released by Parker Brothers in 1984. Aside from me being unable to configure my gamepad in the emulator that I used, Altera, this plays exactly like the final release for the Atari 8-bit. The same look, feel, graphics, timing, everything is the same. So far as I know, there's no real differences other than it being on a cartridge for a slightly different system. Next up is the Atari 2600 version, released in 1984 by Parker Brothers. It's kinda special. A lot was sacrificed to make this version work on the old 2600, and this version does not feel very good to play. You can vaguely see the original game in this, but everything is very different and simplified, to the point of feeling like a cheesy knockoff. This is the first room you see, for example. That jittery floor is a conveyor that pushes you to the left, but you need to jump to the right and grab this white line, which is a rope, to get across to the ladder to go down. You can't climb this rope to the top, but there are places like the torch room you can climb up to the top of the rope just fine. In this room, both of these lines are different ropes. One lets you climb to the top, the other doesn't. I ended up dying an awful lot in this version. It took me a while to get the timing down for hopping over snakes. One of the white key rooms had these blinking platforms I could never quite time right. The laser traps are all over the place and are particularly brutal, with very little margins of error allowed. Your jump is at a different angle than the original, so I died miscalculating jumps a number of times. I just died and died and died. There are not enough keys to go around, so make certain you save them for the 2 white door room at the bottom. Right after those doors is a glowy room with a gem here and there to grab, and then you're shoved into level 2. There are also significantly fewer rooms on each level, but I didn't count them. The sound is serviceable, I suppose, but I really didn't enjoy playing this version. Here's the Commodore 64 version, released by Parker Brothers in 1984. The only working version I had was hacked and trained. Are all of these options really necessary for Montezuma's Revenge? Unlike most C64 ports, this looks a bit different than the original. It took a few elements from the prototype, such as the cobwebs and barrels. The snakes are more animated, and the spiders just look really dumb. Your character's walking animation looks like he's limping, and jumping looks very stilted. There are extra treasures in places, and the sounds are a bit different. If you die to an enemy, you turn into a misty version of yourself. You also don't get to control your character in the first room. Then there are the differences in the controls. They feel very sticky and not as responsive as the Atari 8-bits controls. The second ladder you climb in the game is a bit hard to go up. Similar to the prototype, you have to take it diagonally for some reason or back slightly away from the wall. Jumping is not as responsive, and it isn't the same either, as this jump was always correct the many times I took it in the Atari version, even in the dark, and I just died here in the C64 version. Also, for me, this kept crashing. I switched from WinVice to CCS64, and the game ran there just fine, so I was able to finish a level. The treasure room is 3 rooms wide with pulls on the outer edges. After grabbing gems for a while, I froze for some reason, and then suddenly was forced onto a pole, going past several more rooms of gems before automatically entering room 19 on level 2. Here is the Apple II version, released by Parker Brothers and BCI Software in 1984. I have no idea why the menu screen says Black Bag High Society. Maybe this version was cracked? In any case, this version did not feel great to play and had all sorts of problems, the least of which is that it was really slow. It seems to be based on the C64 version of the game, as it has a similar entrance sequence, cobwebs in places, barrels, and such. However, that's about where the similarities end. The controller is a bit fiddly and even defaulted to every direction being held until I explicitly pressed them all, which killed me a couple of times right off. The graphics are all simplified and everything seems to be drawn on a solid background instead of as sprites, so there's black boxes regularly showing up behind things. The sound was just awful and La Cucaracha no longer even plays. You just get a little tone when you grab items. There was no indication of any sort when you had the amulet, and it lasted a very short amount of time. And with the game playing a bit slowly, it was also a bit easier. Entering room 6-5 from above just instantly killed me. Yep, that's fair. In the treasure room, there's a pull that if you hit it, you just slide and slide and slide past all sorts of treasure you can't get, just like the Commodore 64 version. Not only that, but in several rooms, the game started lagging. It would speed up and slow down fairly randomly, making it hard to get through those busy rooms. Blah. Also in 1984, Parker Brothers released a ColecoVision version. You start off picking a level, and an animation of jumping into the pyramid is shown, similar to the beginning of the Commodore 64 version. Aside from the stages being a little similar, the controls being a tad sluggish, and the game playing a little on the quick side, this is quite a playable port of the game. The game does feel a little fiddly compared to the original, but that's probably due to me being so accustomed to the Atari 8-bit version. The graphics are almost the same, though your character has the silly limp from the C64 version instead of a walk. His torso never moves when he's walking along. Jumping, he kicks out his foot. Does he think he's Bruce Lee or something? The animations are all simpler, but they work. I like the fire better in this version anyways. The sound for walking is pretty awful, though. As I said, the rooms are a little smaller, but also the positions of things are a little different. There's a rolling skull on the right here in room 2-8. The key in room 1-9 is to the right of the ladder instead of to the left. Room 4-5 and 7-6 threw me too because the pillars and the fire below the ropes are quite different. But the big difference for me was the V-shaped rooms like 2-10 and 4-6. I couldn't figure out how to jump back to the middle because from the right side, the moment you step even slightly over the ledge, you fall down. The trick to getting back up is to come at it from the left. How the game registers where you're standing is confusing. This is really noticeable in room 7-4 because I fell through this tiny gap a couple of times when I really shouldn't have. Then things like falling through the pillar in room 8-4 really threw me. Let's look at this in slow motion. Yep, I pop back up, but under the bridge when it reappears, just to fall on the other side of the pillar. Weird. And the music didn't play properly in the treasure room. When you jump down at the very end, you just hit the rightmost pole and slide down. This is the MS-DOS release by Parker Brothers, released in 1984. I tried running it at about 1,000 cycles in DOSBox, but that was apparently way too fast and the game was unplayable. At 300 cycles, the speed felt right even if the game was still quite off. The game is clearly a port of the C64 version with all the little extras from that, as well as the stutter walking, stilted jumping, stupid looking spiders, and now with a limited palette and bad sounds. The controller felt alright to use once it seemed to reset itself, but here we are limited to CGA's 4 colors, with white being an orange color instead. Some things like fire don't even animate. The character sprites constantly blinked, and it got significantly worse in busy rooms such as 4-5. The frame rate was also awful, about 1/4 the Atari version. There's not a lot else to say, it's so much like the C64 version. At least it didn't crash on me like that version did. In 1984, Sinclair Research released a ZX Spectrum version called Panama Joe, though this is still technically Montezuma's Revenge. Still. Vaguely. This feels like an extremely minimal effort affair that only barely conveys the feel of the game, complete with overly simplified rooms, bad hitboxes, extremely sluggish gameplay, and lackluster animations. The graphics are simplified down to the bare minimum, and the gems seem to have been turned into silver coins. Sometimes the spiders didn't even bother with all 2 frames of their animation. Nope, one'll do. It works, I guess? What the heck is up with your character? It looks like some random pudgy man in a hard hat. There is almost a complete lack of sound, and when there is any sound, you only get 2 sound effects. There is La Cucaracha when you grab an item, it plays twice when you gain an extra man, the last note plays when you open a door, and there's a crunch sound whenever you die from anything. The map is different and almost completely linear, with only a couple deviations that are either a dead end or just a small branch from the true path. Most of the rooms are vaguely like the originals, but all of them are simplified and moving around them feels off, like hitting a wall jumping off this platform which causes you to fall to your death. The last few rooms are all very simplistic, but thankfully there are only 30 or so total rooms. Trying to grab objects is frustrating throughout, as you seem to need to be at just the right horizontal position to grab them. About a quarter of the way through the game, it stops giving you coins at all, so for most of my playthrough, my score hardly budged past 20,000. There is a torch right before the first room that is in total darkness, at least. The blinking platforms didn't work a lot of the time either. It's very clearly inspired by the prototype version of Montezuma's Revenge, without any of its strengths. There's a silent introduction that is just this. The font is reminiscent of the original intro's font. If you hang around for a while, a bat takes you away, and just like the prototype, there's a stomping boss at the end. This has to be the absolute worst looking boss I've ever seen in any game. Why even bother with the eyes on this? It just makes it look worse because he's just rapidly blinking. He seems to be stomping, which makes you fall through the ground. It killed me once, but the second time I jumped at him, and then this happened. And then I was apparently on level 2. In 1989, Parker Brothers released a SEGA Master System version. Unlike other versions, it has a little intro screen showing an Aztec temple. Then it shows Panama Joe walking up to the top while playing Jarabe Tapatio or the Mexican Hat Dance. The top of each level is a lot like the original Atari 8-bit version, minus the blinking bridge conveyor and the poles. And when you start the level, it gives a little story unique to that level. The graphics are pretty nice, including having multiple graphics for the treasures and keys even though they work the same. Your character is no longer really pudgy and is dressed like a green park ranger. The unused parts of the rooms have numerous different patterns appear in them, which is pretty neat. The sounds are fairly mediocre but serviceable, though the jumping sounds just like shooting in Firebug. Opening doors sounds like dying in Super Mario Bros. And dying to enemies sounds like getting a shield power-up in Mr. Robot. The rooms are a little bit different, but didn't take me too long to get used to, except that I didn't realize you had to explicitly use amulets at first. I just thought it wasn't working, but then decided to press the second button at one point and it used up an amulet. I think it's interesting that they try to keep the original game's look for disappearing platforms, but seriously, what the heck is up with these spiders? When you finish a level, you get a treasure room that has a set number of treasures and giant wooden spikes closing in on you. I just grabbed some of the treasures and cleared out fast. On level 2, the text mentions bats. Do we get bats? Of course we get bats! Anyways, this is a quite playable port of the game, and the improved graphics are a nice change. Thanks to Robert Jager, the original creator of the game, Montezuma's Revenge is now available on iOS and Android, and possibly Windows 10 in the near future. His friend Mark Sunshine, who gave him the original idea to create the game, has contributed music and graphics for this version of the game. It costs $1.99 on the Android store right now, and is released under the company name of Normal Distribution LLC. It's still being updated as well. I do have to mention I recorded this with Google Play Games, so there's a stupid icon, the video quality is awful, the microphone picks up me shifting, and the sounds cut out randomly. Just ignore that. Oh, and apparently I didn't record audio on one of the videos. Great. There's an intro screen with very simple music going, and a documentation screen. Apparently you're Pedro again in this version instead of Panama Joe. It looks like every level has 3 crowns which were added in for completionists. Whenever I found them in the game, they were in different places. You can choose between a new look and a classic look. I tried both of them and the game feels about the same in either, though the new look has every room visible with side-scrolling for each floor, which is a little bit odd in places on level 1, such as being able to see room 310 to the right here even though it's unreachable. There is an on-screen gamepad to move around with, and it does support an external controller, but I have none that are compatible with a phone. While there are a number of options for the gamepad, I never quite got the hang of not feeling a controller, so my left thumb kept slipping position and my right finger kept missing the button. Hey, I don't play phone games. The new graphics are cute, albeit a little stiff-looking. I like how Dying in Fire looks, though, with a fancier puff of smoke showing up. The new sounds work, and of course, we still get La Cucaracha when grabbing treasures. In Classic mode, it was neat to see the original Pedro used with the release version of the maps. The snakes turn around to face you now, too. Oh, and you could pick up gems even with 5 items in your inventory. I didn't care for the way the game worked with the side-scrolling, though, because enemies still turned around at the boundaries of the room, even if it didn't make logical sense to me. And it was probably a bug, but once I died and got flung back a whole room, and then the frame rate started going all wonky, and I warped across the room in one place, and skipped a rope in another, and thankfully there weren't any other bugs that I noticed. You do have 1 less life in this version, though, because that's the number of lives at the top, not extra lives like the original. The jumping also didn't feel quite right, and I died in places that I would have survived in the original game, such as jumping over the snake, or here in room 6-9. Yeah, I should have landed on top of or on the right rope here if the jump was the same. At the very end, the last doors need a gold key instead of a white one, so it seems you're forced to go down into the tricky blinking bridge and die. All things considered, though, I could see a lot of people enjoying this version. I think I'll stick to my Atari emulator with a physical controller, though. While preparing this video, I got to try a beta for the Windows 10 release of Montezuma's Revenge, being developed by Robert Jager and Normal Distribution. This is essentially the same as the iOS and Android version, but with updated controls for use on a PC. It sounds and looks just like that version. The keyboard controls were not well tested. You move with the arrow keys and jump with Control, Alt, Shift, or Space. I didn't realize all those keys were options, so I tried it with Shift, which just ended up causing the Windows sticky keys pop up to appear. Why is that even a thing in Windows? But anyways, there are a couple other keys, like A, that just seem to force you to go to the left nonstop. Don't use the keyboard controls. The game didn't register my Thrustmaster controller at all, but it did work with the Xbox 360 controller I got for playing Dark Souls. The 2 analog sticks did not function very well. Trying to move slowly just moved at full speed, but then I tried to move at full speed with them, and everything started going sluggish, and then my controller would randomly stick in a direction. But using the D-pad on the Xbox controller did work, so that's what I ended up doing, even though it's a bit more rigid than my main controller. Another problem was that if you jumped and then pushed down mid-air, it was ignored, so you wouldn't automatically climb back down the ladder here in room 19, which was a problem right away. I still didn't get along great with the new version. Using the classic mode, though, the game still feels the same at least. My main gripes, aside from the controller problems, were just subtle changes from the original. Jumps move you a bit further horizontally, you bump into walls unexpectedly in places, and sometimes I landed in illogical places, like partway through this rope. If I was being a completionist, the crowns are out there to find on each level. One was placed in a part of a platform room I'd never been to, so it was interesting to have a reason to go there, and then die trying to get out. I also liked the big Aztec sunstone in the last room 9-9, which took me by surprise since I rarely had a torch down there. The treasure room between levels was rather lackluster, glitchy, and had no music at all, which felt strange. In any case, aside from minor problems and the controller issues I had, this looks like a decent version of the game. Tighten up the jumping to match the original and allow me to use the controller I want, and I'd even have fun playing this version. For my version comparison, I'm including the Game Boy version called Montezuma's Return here, since it's heavily based on the original game, though I never reached the treasure room in that version. In 1997, Utopia Technologies and Software 2000 released a game called Montezuma's Return, which was touted as a sequel to the original Montezuma's Revenge. Utopia Technologies was run by Robert Jager himself, after all. And we can even see an Aztec temple right in the beginning that you have to climb up to get into. Aside from some throwbacks to the original game, like climbing ropes and dealing with bouncing skulls, what I saw of this game was quite different from the original. Unfortunately, as I couldn't get it to run natively, nor in VirtualBox, I had to try to run it in emulators, so I didn't get a feel for the game on a fast enough system. It didn't support a mouse, and trying to do simple things like turning with either keyboard or controller didn't work very well. I tried in PCEM with Windows 98 and a Voodoo patch, but that completely broke it because it kept saying demo files required for demo version. Okay. It's one of the only cases of a first-person platform game I've ever seen. The only earlier one I can think of is Ultima Underworld 2, which is more RPG than platformer, but boy, you do a lot of platforming in that game. Much later, Portal comes to mind as another first-person platform game. Unlike both of those games, which I could play through without too much difficulty, Montezuma's Return often forces the view to shift to your feet where you can even see your legs to try to see where you would land. This combined with this wobble that happened when you missed jumps made me feel very sick very quickly, so I was unable to play the game to comment much on it. Like Dungeon Master Nexus, I just can't play this game. Another game called Montezuma's Return was released in 1998 by Tarantula Studios and Take-Two Interactive for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. The first ROM I found for this, for the Game Boy Color, was a bit crash-prone, so I didn't get very far. I switched to the Game Boy version and it seemed better. I'll show some samples from both since they are technically the same game, albeit with different colors. Aside from the crashing, though, this seemed like an interesting remake of the game. Neat extras that were added in are things like a visible border of the pyramids in parts, making some rooms oddly shaped, rising and lowering platforms, and different music playing in different areas. Or maybe it was different depths. Unlike the PC Montezuma's Revenge, this is based on the original game. You start off in a room with a number of enemies and a pole, and eventually your character decides to slide down on his own. Once you get down the rope, you actually start playing, and we see right off that this room looks an awful lot like the second room in the original. Lots of the rooms are based on the originals, but aren't quite the same. This game takes quite a few things from the prototype, such as extra details in places. The ropes are, well, ropes, and they even burn up in one room. There's a post-death animation showing your character jump down a pole to get to where you left off. The graphics were serviceable, though oftentimes I couldn't tell what was in the background versus the foreground. The keys have different shapes instead of colors, since the Game Boy doesn't really have colors. There was music playing the entire time, and you can turn that off from the main menu. It wasn't too annoying, at least. The sounds were not very good, but that's generally the case with the Game Boy anyways. There are numerous extra obstacles to deal with. Drops that kill you, archers that shoot arrows at you, spikes that stab at different speeds from the ceiling and floors. There is a map with multiple tiers of side rooms that you can go into, but for some idiotic reason, some of the entrances to these areas only allow you to go one way, to my great annoyance at the end of this awful 5-room area, having to then trek through it all again in reverse. There were a few problems I had with it though. The zoomed-in view made it hard to tell what to do in some rooms because you couldn't see very far. In so many places there were keys or gems or other items that were simply impossible to reach. I kept trying to get further in it, but the game is woefully linear with only a few options here and there, forcing you to go a very specific path to proceed. After playing for a couple hours, I got so frustrated with the game I just gave up. Still, it didn't seem that bad, especially if you could get it to work without the crashing. Just realize that this game really wants to kill you, as it is very hard. In 2018, an unofficial ROM hack for the preliminary Monty version of Montezuma's Revenge called Montezuma Again was released by Pepe on his Monamaker website. There's a link to it in the description. This is very similar to the Bruce Lee Return of Fury hack that we saw in the Bruce Lee episode, in that it was using the original code, but the rooms are much, much harder. Thankfully I could play it in Altera since this one was done for the Atari 8-bit. Pepe decided to give you 200 lives when you start off, and thank goodness he did, because you're going to die a lot on these levels. They range from very easy to ridiculously difficult, and instead of having to worry about failing due to running out of lives, you can instead worry about figuring out how to get through the rooms. I went into this blind, lost 50 to 100 lives, and it took about an hour and 30 minutes to complete it. I have to say, this is one of the most enjoyable games I've played in quite a long time. Seriously, Pepe, awesome job here. There were many times I'd come to a new room and just think, what the hell? This looks like madness, yet the entire thing is passable, possibly without dying, though that would have been very difficult to pull off. The rooms serpentine around quite a lot, so you'll come at one part of the room from the top, then later come at it from a different direction. The rooms seem to be based on the original rooms from the game, but they've been carved up often beyond all recognition. The experience is, in this case, blessedly linear, meaning that it doesn't take long to figure out where you have to go next. Instead of having to spend time finding the new content, you're guided through all of it. Every key has a specific purpose, and you can just keep pressing onward without worrying whether or not you needed to save something for somewhere else. There are a few cases where you need a sword to not die, except that there are tons of lives, so at least that wouldn't be the end of the game. Throughout this, you'll find some flaws in the game engine, some quite amusing. If you go down a really long pole, the sound starts glitching badly, then just goes quiet. If you fall from a giant pit that heads down a screen, you can land on the next screen without dying. This was probably done to prevent dying from dropping from the treasure room. When you die from falling, the lasers can still kill you, so you get to die twice in this instance. Not only that, but a room filled with lasers has some odd-looking colors show up. I'm not certain that's set up intentionally or not. A conveyor can push you right through a locked door, and apparently there are white hat and blue hat items, but you're never going to get those. In many places, there's a fire at the top of a rope. These are aggravating, but it's not like they move. There are lasers in weird places, conveyors galore, and yet more jumping puzzles that weren't too horrible to figure out. In one area, it says Rob Rules, referring to Rob Jager, the creator of the game. In another, it says Pedro, the original name of the player character. The only part of this entire experience that I did not enjoy was the blinking platform timing puzzles. I died many times trying to make a video getting through this and was getting quite aggravated. Thankfully, this only showed up a couple of times in this hack. This is definitely worth playing through if you enjoyed the original game. Normally, I try to include how well the game in question sold, but I have absolutely no idea how well this game sold. The phrase Montezuma's Revenge means getting diarrhea while visiting Mexico, and has absolutely nothing to do with the game itself. Robert Jager, the creator of the game, was asked by Mark Sunshine to make a Mesoamerican game with the name, and that's why it was used. Sunshine is even credited in the introduction to the prototype as creating the concept. When I was 10 years old or so, I got to go to Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. It's a great place for a kid to go enjoy lots of roller coasters and the like, but my favorite there was called Montezuma's Revenge. It's just a giant loop with 2 slopes. You go from 0 to 55 miles per hour in about 3 seconds and fly through the loop going forward, go up the slope past it, then go backwards through the loop again until you hit the slope at the back, and then you come to a stop. Sure, it was an hour-long wait for a 35-second ride, but man, it was totally worth it. Some sources consider Montezuma's Revenge a Metroidvania. The definition of a Metroidvania seems to differ from person to person, but if your definition of a Metroidvania is simply a platform game that you can traverse freely with locked areas to open, sure, I guess it fits for Montezuma's Revenge. But it certainly wasn't the first platform game to require exploring and finding keys to proceed. In 1983, the year before Montezuma's Revenge came out, we had both Shamus Case 2 and Pharaoh's Curse that fit this definition, and nobody seems to consider those Metroidvanias. Make up your minds, people! Robert Jager was only 16 when he wrote Montezuma's Revenge. He brought his prototype version to a consumer electronics convention in 1983 to try to drum up interest for it when Parker Brothers saw the game and asked if they could buy the rights for the game. Robert was happy with the amount they offered for the game, and though the game was not completed, he gave them everything he had for it, and they took it from there. He also says later he was offered a deal to port Montezuma's Revenge to the NES for Nintendo and didn't take up their offer because they only wanted to pay him royalties, not an upfront amount. Before that, he had written a minimalistic Pac-Man clone called Chomper, released in 1981 and published by MMG Micro Software. I'd never heard of this game before now. In 1982, he released Pinhead under his own company name Utopia Software. It was a surprise to me to see this, as I had completely forgotten that I'd played Pinhead in the past, where you pop balloons on your head or catch a few at a time then pop them all at once. Robert must have really liked playing Pac-Man because he also apparently played Jawbreaker, a Sierra Online clone of the game, and liked the game enough to write his own level editor called Jawbreaker Construction Set. I couldn't get this to work, so here's just some gameplay of Jawbreaker instead. After Montezuma's Revenge was released, Robert started working on a C64 port of Crossfire Canyon but never actually released it, and then he didn't make computer games for a while longer. He says it's because of the video game crash in 1983. He was the head of Utopia Technologies, which released Montezuma's Return in 1997, but did not make any other new computer games after that due to the game failing to sell particularly well. He had no part in the creation of the Montezuma's Return on the Game Boy. According to his LinkedIn profile, he was the CTO at Proof9 for a while, a consultant for Poker Tracker making online poker analysis software from 2009 to 2017, and a consultant for One Advance from 2019 to 2020. And he's back to working on Montezuma's Revenge again. Rob has a Facebook account named Montezuma's Revenge, where he posts news about his remakes of Montezuma's Revenge for iOS, Android, and possibly even Windows 10. These are released by his company, Normal Distribution. I've included all sorts of links to him in the description, especially since this took me quite a long time to find. Parker Brothers used to be a household name because they largely published board games such as Monopoly, Sorry, and Trivial Pursuit. In 1977, they also began producing video games, such as the Atari 8-bit ports for Q*bert, Popeye, and, yes, even Tutankhamun. In 1991, like some of the other companies I've brought up in this series, they got purchased by Hasbro. They almost immediately stopped releasing games, and even their popular board games eventually became just Hasbro products. A few years ago, a bunch of different AI projects had turned to the Atari 2600 to try to beat various games. They were largely successful except for two games, Pitfall and Montezuma's Revenge. I'm only going to talk about Montezuma's Revenge here, though the problem with Pitfall is the same. There's no immediate reward for doing things correctly. In the first room, you have to reach the key on the left before you get your first points in the game. The AIs were all trying to gauge success purely on getting points. This was causing them to fail to get further, when realistically progressing through the stage and not dying should have also been a large factor as well. This does require understanding the game a bit, however. In any case, in 2018, a team called Uber did find a way to have their AI traverse the game and then eventually complete it over and over again, to get to level 100 and above with more than 2 million points, beating the highest human record. I don't know why it likes jumping over and over again. Maybe the AI is just really hoppy. A while back, my wife found an artist on TeePublic named VHZC that made some cool t-shirts using reimaginings of scenes from various old computer games. I ordered a few, and unfortunately, TeePublic's print quality is just garbage. However, I did get a couple prints from VHZC as well, and currently have this Montezuma's Revenge artwork up on my computer room wall, along with this awesome image from Archon. I have a link to VHZC's TeePublic page in the description, though I would pass on getting t-shirts from that site.